A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Well, dear friends, today we are doing something a little bit different. I'm here with my own son. Tomorrow is going to be Father's Day, so it's a privilege, it's fun, it's a blessing to have my son Marco with me. Ciao, Marcolino.
So,
He's up in, where are you now? In Nashville, right?
Nashville, Franklin.
Franklin.
Yeah.
So we're in the same state, an hour difference. I still don't understand the hour difference. You're straight up above me. Why are you an hour behind? I
Makes no sense at all.
don't know. Oh boy. But I wanted to bring something from a younger perspective because people in this channel, actually, the bigger group is 30 to 35. So Marco being 33 is right smack in the middle of that. And he can have some insights for some of you guys that are listening to the channel, in again honor of Father's Day. But I wanted to start with a couple of jokes that I came across from different comedians, and I thought, oh, look at this. This is funny. So one says, I just taught my kids about taxes by eating 38% of their ice cream.
Beth enjoy all the time. She doesn't like it.
Tell her that's all
But
about
that
taxes.
she hates taxes already.
Are you actually doing that to her? You telling her? By the time a man realizes that maybe his father was right, he usually has a son who thinks he's wrong. Having one child makes you a parent. Having two kids makes you a referee. You have, and you are right in that position because you have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, soon to be four. But then you have twins coming. We're going to talk about that later. Twin coming in July. Having a 2-year-old is like having a blender without a lid. Being a great father is like shaving. No matter how good you shave today, you have to do it again tomorrow. And that is true because it shows our responsibility. It's not a one-time done type of deal. It's something that goes on day in and day out. And even at this age, we I think we never finish fathering or even learning, going back and forth. So I wanted to reflect a little bit, Mark, on the approach of parenting because unfortunately kids come without a manual. You have to kind of test, as a trial and error type of deal. And in our case specifically, coming from a mixed background, cultural background, Italian and American, it wasn't easy to decide a parenting style. Are you going with the more stricter one? As an Italian, coming from parents that fought in World War II, there was a certain mindset. Mom being different, being raised in California during a different time set. So the style and even the values, what do you do with it? We're kind of colliding a little bit. So what we resorted to is to go to the word and use that as a foundation. But before we get into the word, because I would like to look at a couple of scriptures, do you even see or sense the different style, if you wish, if you are comparing yourself to some other kids growing up, or was everything the same?
You mean, did I recognize that I was being parented differently?
Correct, meaning you felt that you are more restricted, you felt that you're more disciplined, you felt it was more severe.
I mean, compared to compared to my peers in Italy, I definitely think there's a lot more restriction. Kids had hardly any restriction.
That's interesting because most of your peer would have parents my age. Therefore, it's not just my parents teaching me something, it's more of a my mindset, I guess. And
Uh,
it's going back to the biblically based, probably more so.
Yeah, I think the big difference that I'm recognizing for myself now is there's biblical parenting, which to your last little quote there, the shaving, that's spot on, right? Because I mean, it's so easy to give up as a parent. It's easy to be, or it's not easy to be, but it's easy to remain as a cop in parenting and constantly saying no, 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 no. It's much harder to actually get level with your kids, talk to them eye to eye and say, hey, no, and here's why. Let me explain it to you, right? And I
And there's
definitely
a time for that. There's a time for that because trying to discern that when you are dealing with a 2-year-old, and there are issues of safety, perhaps, it doesn't do any good to say, no, you cannot cross the street, like this because you're going to be. They know that that's a no, and that's it. And then later, when they can absorb the information, absolutely.
true. Yeah. And then there's gender roles in this too. Like the girls respect my no more than they expect their mother's no. They know with the mother they can get seven no's. They know with me, somewhere between one and three, depending on how the day is going.
You remember how you were raised? If I told you twice, I told you one too many times.
Yeah. So and then it's different also between each child. I've been noticing recently, just the last few days, Camila is so much more willing to be obedient earlier on. I say, hey guys, go pick up the pillows that you threw around the couch. Kami will go and do it. Joya, I will have to tell seven times. But it's also and I relate to her in this. This is interesting because it's not that she is doing it on purpose. Her brain is just running 1,000 miles an hour. This is more of a genetic thing, I think. Her and I are so similar. It's frustrating. She was all day in the principal's office yesterday.
Oh, great.
Yeah, in summer school.
You're getting
And I'm
some
like,
medicine, huh? Coming back.
it's genetic. I mean, you can't, she wasn't taught she resists, she challenges authority because she wants to know the root of why she can or can't do certain things. And that's not inherently bad, right? It's a curiosity.
Mhm.
Curiosity, though, in children can get really frustrating really quick. So parenting Joya versus parenting Camila are two different ways. But then you look at, so back to your question, do I feel like I was parented differently? There's times in the moment that it seemed harsh or overly strict or whatever it may be. But then you look at biblical standards and there's what is it? The rod shall not depart from, how's
Yeah.
the verse? Yeah.
Yeah, say, basically that you're not going to kill, by using the rod on the back of your child. And the child is going to grow straight. But let me look at one scripture. There is a scripture that I found very interesting. We all probably know it. Ephesians 6:4 says that fathers, specifically to the fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. So that's the first thing, do not provoke to anger. And in Greek, that provoke is do not cause exasperation or frustration. So it's something that is pretty common, I guess. If he's even scriptural, if he's bringing that one sentence up, is because probably a lot of fathers do encounter that. So what he's saying is careful not to cause anger and resentment in your child. Okay. And then he goes on to say, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So the fact that we need to discipline is important. As a father, we have that responsibility. You're looking at the life of David, King David. He didn't discipline his kids, and then you saw what happened afterwards. So what does that discipline mean? Well, that discipline means, yes, I love you, but I love you too much to let this thing go that is going in the wrong direction. And that requires character on the father's side, requires patience, requires consistency. The simple fact that you said, that Romana says it 7 times, that becomes a threatening, repeating parent. Well, what you're doing, you're reinforcing basically in a person to shut the parent out. Unless I hear it 7 or 8 times, it really doesn't matter. But if you know that there is a consequence on the second time that I tell you something, whoa, 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 he means business. I better comply, right? So the goal is not to crash the person, to crush the spirit, but the goal is to turn the heart toward the right direction, not to turn the heart toward the Heavenly Father, but never do that with in a moment of anger. And unfortunately, in the old days, the way I grew up, I don't know about people here, but back in Europe, there was a lot of frustration. So sometimes the father might have been angry about something else, and the kids will get the results of that anger, right? I remember talking to my sister and saying, "Oh yeah, sometimes you got beaten up, and I don't even know why." Dad came home, he was like that. He had to pick somebody, you know. So at least you didn't go through the brunt of that. But yeah, the discipline factor. I mean, how do you are you in sync, first of all, because it's important also to be in sync with your partner when it comes to disciplining. Uh, it's already hard with young kids because they're always trying to put one parent against the other. They know they can get away with this one with certain things or the other one with some other things. So if you're both in sync, then at least they are hearing the same message instead of hearing conflicting messages, right? Are you
Yeah,
in sync?
we're in sync.
You guys
We're,
talk
we're on
about
the,
it?
we're on the same page. We're on the same page, which is really important because if the girls see that we're not a unified front, then that's not only weakness, but it's confusing. They don't know what to expect. It's also important to sit down with our kids and we explain to them, hey, this is what happens. If we have to repeat ourselves 3 times, here's the results. Either we're gonna have timeout, we're gonna have spanking, depending on the severity. We started doing, stars for them in the morning to get them to do certain tasks. Sometimes, like Camila will respond better to things being taken away from her, whereas Joy responds better to actual, spanking
Praise. Oh,
or yeah, spanking or reinforcement of certain behavior. And then Ramon and I, we have a thing where if none of us will discipline out of anger. That's really important. So
absolutely. Hmm.
there's been times where she's like, "Hey, I'm at 80%. You know, you take over. I'm gonna go take a walk. I'm gonna go take a breath because I'm getting frustrated." And then she does things that she doesn't want to regret
Yeah.
displaying out of anger or yelling out of anger, right? She's also disadvantaged in that she was raised in a family that was much more absent. Um, and that resulted to just yelling in most cases, to try to get a response.
Mhm.
And at least you guys, were intentional bringing me up. I wasn't an easy kid, but there was consequences. They were clear, and that takes it. It's hard to
But
discipline well.
see, I rather have another kid like you because it's a matter of curbing that curiosity, like you were saying earlier with Joy. I know it's a matter of curbing that energy, that enthusiasm, all that extra zest for life that you have inside, which you had. If you ask mom, hey, how was I? Oh, you're a terrible. You ask me, I say, no, no. Well, probably because I was very much that way myself. So I don't recognize it as something being weird. It's just a matter of, hey, I'm testing life. What is my lane? I'm trying to find my lane here and see what's on the
It takes a
horizon.
lot more energy, that's for sure.
Say what?
It takes a lot more energy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does. It does. One other scripture I came across a couple of days ago. It's just bizarre. It just I don't know. I don't remember reading that before. I probably read it, but didn't resonate. Maybe I'm more susceptible to it because of Father's Day. But it was Proverb 10:1, where it says that a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. I thought, That's weird. Why are they looking at wisdom attached to the father, and that brings gladness or joy, and then foolishness, and they're attaching that to grief with the mother? And I was trying to unpack that a little bit.
Probably because the mother's more tender and sensitive, right? So if you have a foolish son, the thought would be that A, either there was no discipline, or B, there was so much discipline and it wasn't getting through to the son that the mother felt bad seeing the child constantly in pain and not getting it. Like Romana always says every time she sees me pull one of the girls aside, and she's like, "Oh, it's just so sad. It's so sad." And it's like, yeah, but this is the method that works right now, you know? Nobody likes to do it.
And
No.
one thing of comfort, Marco, and probably you already know this, I'm not telling you anything new. It's hard the first even 8 or 9 years, where you really need to wrap yourself. Then there is the 10, the teen years I mean, they're on a different world altogether, but the foundation is already set. So you need to kind of reinforce it, but the big bulky work has already been done. And they will build upon that. The kids themselves will build upon that. Because mom and dad is not always there. I remember being a kid and being different in the sense that I was processing things to my mind at that age, 8, 9, 10, 11. And perhaps I didn't like certain things that my parents were telling me or making me do, but there was something important. I knew that they loved me. So even though it didn't jive too well, the simple fact, there is one, there is Joya. The simple fact that they told me something that was good for me down the line was enough to say, I got to digest this. I got to process it and digest it. And actually put me kind of at an advantage with my peers because I was processing it and applying it. Are you with me?
Sorry, I got these girls running in their bathing suits ready to go. All right, say
Ciao,
hi to them.
Gioia.
Go close all the doors, please.
Ciao, Cami. You have swimming caps?
Yeah.
You're ready to go swimming? Awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna go swimming after this. We gotta be quiet for Papa, okay? Can you close all the doors, please? Thank you.
Bye bye. See how obedient? Yeah, they both walked away. Hey, no screaming,
Oh,
yelling.
but they're getting a reward on the other end.
But
Uh,
going back to the scripture, which I found interesting, I think that the child's behavior affects both parents, right? Though affects them in different ways. The emotion might be different. So when you're tying wisdom with the father, there is something there. I don't know if it's pride, might be pride for a father, because it's a reflection. I mean, the way you are has a reflection on me. I'm not saying that I'm 100% responsible, but it has a big reflection on me. If I was a scumbag and I raised you poorly, you would probably behave in a different way, right? And even I remember my father, in the last letter that he wrote to me right before he died, he said that he prayed for God to impart his wisdom on me. I mean, he could have prayed for many different things, but specifically he prayed for that. I'm going, wow, wow. Why? Why? Because it's a way of saying, I'm praying that my son is going to be responsible, he's going to be respectful, he's going to be upright, not just in his own life, but in the life that he will be lording as well once he builds a family. So to see that in you brings me joy, brings me contentment. I can only speak from my side. On mom's side, again, since she's more of the emotional person, probably
is
that
she?
that nurturing factor is the one that sees the foolishness and say, hey, it kills my heart. And also kids have all sorts of antennas. I mean, they not only they're able to see and even hear much more, but they also replay many times the behavior that they see in us, right? And probably that's another factor when you're seeing that behavior replaying, especially the good part of the behavior that is replaying, you're saying, wow, it's stuck. um, have you seen any of those replays yet? Do you observe in your kids, or is it way too early?
Oh yeah. Um, well, a lot of them are like the negative ones. Like when we see, what was Joy doing the other day? There's sweet ones like where I think Romana was sick a couple weeks ago, and Camila came in and brought her the blanket, or even you the other day, right? You're at the pool and you were getting too much sun on your
On my
head.
head.
You
Mhm.
brought the towel and covered your head. So she's tender and sweet in that way. And I mean, she didn't really get that from me because I'm not quite like that. Romana has more of that. And so that's nice to see. Joya, similarly, I mean, she the sweet thing is seeing her. I mean, she's such an evangelist. She'll go around and the first thing she asks people is like, "Oh, my name is Joya. Do you have Jesus in your heart?"
That's it, Bob.
Yeah, just
Without
straight
beating
to the
around the
point.
bush.
Wait, which is awesome. There's no fear. She doesn't hold back, and that's why it's so critical. I think parents wait too long to be intentional with their kids, and they're crazy sponges so early on. And there's the negative side of it, where you see Joy getting overly frustrated and like just getting to a point where she's, and then wants to give up.
Mm-hmm.
She takes that. It's a combination of Romana and I, maybe, probably a little bit more Romana, but um, there's the bad sides that they also absorb. And I guess the hope is that, yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but as we break generational sins,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that tree is getting further and further away from what may have been a bad tree several generations ago.
Yeah.
So Roman and I were just talking about this morning. She's like, wow, it's so crazy to think about how where I'm at right now in my life is breaking this pattern in my family, and there's ramifications happening in our direct family unit, but then also even, with her sister-in-law and not sister-in-law, stepsister and her sister and her other siblings, seeing kind of them kind of orbit around this idea as well. But um, yeah, I mean, they take the good and the bad, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're always watching. I mean, it was amazing the other day too. I was on the phone with Romana when she was in Cincinnati, and right after the call, Joy was asking me, she's like, "So are we only going to have one of the two babies?" And there was nothing in that conversation.
Hang on, explain because people that are watching don't know your situation. So, Mark and Romano, they're expecting twins at the end of July, beginning of August, and they had an issue where one of the fetuses was receiving too much nutrients and depleting the other one from, a normal growth. So they did a first surgery where they rerouted basically the vascularity so that they both receive the same, right?
Kind of. They seal off the capillaries on the placenta. It's like a network of roots. So they went in with a laser and sealed off the two different umbilical cords because there was just an imbalance in blood flow in one and the other. And so one was risking dying, which would have probably killed the other. And so we had this surgery 4 weeks ago, and then we had to go back up last week to get blood transfusions because some of the problem came back. One was brain anemic, so we were really concerned for that baby. She had a pretty high probability of passing. And then baby B, the other, was still or is still, sub 1% percentile. But Ramon and I were talking on the phone. I mean, not directly mentioning anything about the babies, and already Joya could sense like, something's not right. She's
Wow.
5 years old. And
Wow.
so she's asking, and you can even see in Camila too, like there's just a sadness. She doesn't maybe understand why she's sad, but she knows that something's amiss. Um, so yeah, I mean, they understand, they comprehend emotionally so much more, I think, than we think they
Give
do.
credit for. Hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Which is a huge, uh, it's a lot of accountability because you gotta, I mean, you're on all the time, right? Which is the hard part about being a parent. You're never off. It's just you're
Hmm.
always on.
Yeah. Shaving, going back to the shaving joke, right? Yeah. How much also there is wisdom involved in how much you need to conceal. You don't want to worry them, obviously. So certain things need to stay concealed because they're not able to process them yet, or it would be devastating. Um, that's another responsibility. I mean, how are you processing that? That's another thing that you and I always had, this open communication and expressing emotion at all levels, which is also important in a father-son relationship, where, in the old days, there wasn't much of that, you know. Yeah. So, how are you processing that? The fact that
Processing what?
potentially you might lose one of the two.
Uh, I think the hardest part is is having the wisdom to know how much intervention to allow. Like where do God's miracles start and medicine end?
Yeah.
It's a blurry line.
Hmm.
I think that's been the hardest part because we don't want to go to the other side and think, well, because we allowed medical intervention, did we go against God's will? And that ultimately resulted in, whatever ultimate outcome we have. We could say the same the
The
other way around.
opposite. Or the
Yeah,
opposite.
exactly. You could go either way. So that's been probably the most difficult part. It's not as weird as it is, it's not so much losing the babies that is as much of a struggle as the weight of every decision and what that could ultimately mean, right? Um, we had friends, really close friends of ours, they just called us yet last night. They just miscarried at 12 weeks, so they're right in the middle of it. It's happening more and more and more, and it's weird, it's tough, hard to reconcile, but ultimately what I told him is, I mean, as weird as it sounds, that child will never have to enter into this broken world. They get to stay in the presence of God and never depart from it. So I'm like, that's a cool thing. Now we get the blunt end of that, where we never get to meet them on this side of heaven. And you feel like I think we feel like we lose grasp or lose control because we can't control the situation, as much as we try to. But ultimately, I mean, we truly have a peace that everything's in the Lord's hands, no matter what the outcome is. I'm not going to say it's not going to be hard if we lose one or both, or if we have defects or whatever the case may be. And it's hard to understand what God's will is because it doesn't make sense in the moment a lot of time. But I mean, his purpose and his plan is perfect. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's always the empirical question, right? Why does God allow, evil in this world? And that, in a sense, is evil. You have a person that is gestating two lives, and all of a sudden, one of them or both potentially can go. And you were showing me statistics. I think it was up until 1970 that situation like that, 60% of the
It's up
time
until 2000,
until 2000.
late 90s or 2000. So it's even sooner.
Wow. Okay, I remember 1970 was a big percentage, and then 2000, it started decreasing.
Yeah, up until 2000, the what was the exact metric? It was like the chance of survival for twins was
Right?
very, very slim compared to now. Now the survival rate's somewhere in the 80s, 80, 85% for one or both twins to survive.
Hmm.
Whereas before it was like a 30% survival rate for twins.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, but that is a tough one. That's definitely a tough one. So if you guys are watching, please, keep Marco and Romano in your prayers because they're at 27 weeks, right? You need to go at least another 5 weeks, ideally.
yeah, we have friends that just had babies at 35 weeks and they've already been in the NICU for 4 weeks.
Wow.
So
Mm.
as long as we can go, and they had a natural birth. I mean, they didn't have to do C-section even. So, I mean, yeah, well,
Mm.
just praying and trusting. It's a big switch from being able to be fully there with the kids as soon as they're born to then them living in a box, for 4 or 5 weeks, being fed from a bottle right away. They don't even get any of the experiences the first two girls got,
Mm.
you know. But
But again, as a father, as an example that kids will look up to, how you're going to process this whole phase in your life, I think is going to be huge for the two girls that you have right now. So, I commend you for that because you both are doing a great job. We were out there last weekend and, we enjoyed the kids. But, and thinking of enjoying the kids, I wanted to think about some milestones, that served as lessons, in our life, the father-son relationship. There is one that comes to mind, a couple of them that comes to mind. One was just motivational, right? How do you set goals and how do you motivate your child? And I still remember, the phase when you were into cars. Well, I don't think you ever walked out of that phase. You're still in that phase. I mean, you know everything about every car for crying out loud. And I remember you were probably what, 16, 15, 16 when I told you, hey, put down your goals. What we used to do, we used to do goals with the family, not just our kids, and also with Jane and myself. List the goals they wanted to achieve throughout the year. Spiritual goals, work goals, family relationship goals, friendship goal, health goals, sports, etc. And we wanted to be very specific. And I remember that when it came down to you and your schooling, you gave me certain grades that you wanted to have. And I made a promise. I said, no, hey, if you hit those marks, I'm going to take you to the Geneva Auto Show. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember how old you were? I don't remember. What were you? 15?
I think that was his 16th. It was either 14 or I think it was 16 because it was more of a milestone birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Senior
and
or
and as soon
junior,
as you
sophomore.
heard the auto show in Geneva, you exceeded all the numbers that you gave me. And we had that long weekend there, in Geneva. It was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so what are you saying that you should have motivated me more with goals and gifts and achievement than with discipline?
No, 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 no. I'm just saying that, the famous carrot, before you got the
Mhm.
stick and you got the carrot. So, one child responds better with the stick, as you said earlier, one responds better with the carrot. I mean, you got a combination of both, probably more sticks than carrots, but
A lot more sticks than carrots.
I didn't get any carrots, so you're lucky you got some carrots.
Uh,
And no, I'm just talking about milestone, or lessons, that probably did something to you, right? To say, no, hey, if I apply myself,
mhm.
and then if there is a certain reward, I can even go the extra mile, right? So you find that you have resources within you that can push you even over and beyond what you already set your mind in. I mean, the simple fact that you're doing what you're doing now work-wise has to come from some lessons that you learned early on.
Oh yeah, I mean, what are you asking? What
Again,
lessons I
I'm
learned from
just
you is
reminiscing some of the milestones that made a difference in where you are. That's just one, in terms of setting goals. But there is another one that I remember, and then I'll let you talk and comment. But another one that I remember that was really powerful. You were a UCSD. Actually, you weren't yet a UCSD. You were transitioning, and all of a sudden you are so excited because they accepted you and so on and so forth. We were in Italy, and then you got that letter saying that you were basically a non-resident and you had to pay out-of-state tuition, which was a ridiculous amount. And I said, no, Marco, we can't afford this right now. We are in ministry, and you almost felt like your dream is shot to pieces. But I had this feeling of the Lord is going to revert this. I just had that image of Lazarus being dead and coming back to life. I mean, that's what I remember. I said, no, Marco, let's work on this. And then, a week later, the whole thing was reversed, miraculous.
Mhm.
So that's another one. When I'm looking at milestones that probably increase your faith too. Increase mine, but at
Yeah.
that time was almost like the Lord said, no, Peppo, pray, move, don't sit, move, pray, and impart that to him. How did it affect you?
Yeah, I mean, those all affected me in various ways. The dean of admission reversing the classification of me being non-resident versus resident. I mean, that was a miracle. I mean, truly, that's not something that happens normally. And that changed tuition from, 30, 40 grand a year to a couple grand a year. So huge, huge shift. Yeah, I think yeah, I have some other kind of milestones, if you will, that come to mind. But before that, what I'm realizing is so much is taught through action rather than words, right? Especially in parenting. You say one thing, do another thing. They will read right through that, and they'll blow right through that. So the importance of truly acting how we want our kids to act. And that's why, to your earlier point of being fresh, seeing behaviors, whether positive or negative, that our kids have, it's like holding up a mirror. and it's a mirror to ourselves saying, oh, shoot, whether these are like epigenetic traits or truly in the genes and genetic, or just purely, absorbed through observation and watching how we do life, right? But yeah, the milestones, those are great. I've got several others. I think one thing that you may not even remember this, but let's see, we were in Palm Beach, and I remember when I opened my first Scott's Trade account in
Mhm.
Palm Beach. And
Mhm.
I think I had just started getting an allowance
Mention how
from,
old you were because they might think, okay, a guy was already 17, you are not.
I mean, 11. How old
Yeah,
was I in Palm
yeah.
Beach? 11 years old. And I remember, you teaching me not only how stocks work and what they are, but what a short was and, margin and like just placing bids. And I remember placing my first investment. I think it was Apple at the time. And that was like my allowance that went into it. So like even little things like that they don't even teach finances in school. And that's one of the most important things to know coming out in real life, right? And those are the kinds of things, the responsibilities that we have as a parent, which is why we're really struggling with, do we homeschool, do we not? If not now, then probably later, just because Joya does have a lot of energy. We have the twins in the way, so it's not probably the right season to do that. Because you need more organization. We're looking at having a house assistant come in so that it can relieve some pressure. Um, but ultimately, I think that's one of the beauties of homeschooling. I'm curious to see how it's going to work because I don't know if I would have been a good candidate for that.
Mm.
Just looking back, but then I think, well, maybe I would have, because the difference is you're not locking up a kid in school for long hours for the day. You're letting them use their interests. And so going back and thinking like, all right, well, you sat down and showed me how a stock worked. I didn't revisit stocks until, business class at Rady School of Management at UCSD,
Wow.
but I was already a step ahead because I learned it at 11 years old. So there are things like that as parents, I think we have such a big responsibility and opportunity to teach and coach. Somebody said it this way, it was really interesting. The first few years of life, you are a cop, right? The second portion of life, toddler stage and up, you're more of a referee or a coach.
Mhm.
And then the latter stage of life, your responsibility is more as a mentor and a
You're an
friend.
influencer. You just influence. You cannot dictate, you
Yeah,
influence.
exactly. So I think that's where, a lot of us parents maybe overlook the first few years of life, not realizing that it is the foundation. We miss that, try to make up for it maybe later when, not that you've missed that window necessarily. Okay, my girls are ringing all the doorbells now.
I don't hear them. It's
It's
okay.
not coming through. Okay. Yeah, lots of milestones. We went through a lot of experience together through spearfishing. Those have made a lot of core memories. I think another great quote that I love, and I have no idea who said this, is our role as a father is to make good memories and visit them often.
Mm.
So not to get too caught up, and I feel like a lot of times I'm stuck and always like policing and saying no and don't do this and don't do, exactly right now. They're out there screwing around on the door and I told them to be quiet.
Hmm.
And I don't know where my wife is. She's supposed to be keeping this one area that we're on an acre property and a farm, and they're all right here.
But praise God, it's not coming through. So
Oh
keep
man.
don't get distracted.
But anyway, yeah, I think it's really,
But the
really
creating the memories and visiting often, especially nowadays in the society that we're in, is so much more crucial because if you go back biblical time or even not that long ago, go back 150 years, people grew up in a farm, talking about a farm. So they were together all the time. What do? You pick up the eggs or you're milking the cows or you're cutting the grass or you're doing, but you're all together. So the interaction between family members was intense. And then you're having a meal, everybody sits down, everybody eats at the same time. There were no distraction of TV, phone, whatever it is. So even more so, what kind of memory are we creating right now? Because those things right here, they are a device of the devil, unfortunately. Because it's so easy to just pop this in the hands of a kid. Okay, boom, that's your babysitter. What kind of memory are you going to create with that kid? It's sad, tell him story. Speaking of memories, we gotta, you say revisit them often. Let's create some new ones. Speaking of spearfishing, we haven't spearfished in too long. We got to do that.
We
And
went in
remembering
October.
memories. I mean, even the fact that we risk our lives together so many times. I don't even know. I think I counted 4 or 5 times where we thought we're not going to come out alive on this one. It was really bad. Remember that time in Louisiana, going out. We are nuts for you get that are listening, guys. So we are in this basically in this bathtub because it's a small inflatable, they call it rib, inflatable boat, was only 16 feet, single engine. We went out to the first rig and we are spearfishing, so we need to go underwater. The water was dirty, couldn't go there. We go to the second rig, 30 miles out, still dirty water. We pushed the fourth one about 45 miles out, nothing. And then we went to the floating one. What was it, 60 miles? I think it was like 60 miles out. I mean, just
Oh,
insane.
and you missed a big part. We drove 12 hours.
Oh, yeah, to get
We
there.
drove 12 hours from Chattanooga all the way down to middle nowhere end of
Louisiana.
Louisiana to then launch straight onto the boat to then drive 60 hours on the boat. Yeah.
So yeah, we went out 60 miles, and typically people take pictures of this oil rig. The workers came out and took picture of us, thinking, "What are these two crazy not doing in the bathtub out here in the middle of nowhere?" And the water was still dirty, so we never got in. And then the worst part was going back, and it was getting dark, and we're going up the Mississippi River. That was scary. That was scary. There was a big container boat, a ship in front of us, loaded, going against the current, so creating a huge wake. And we turned on the lights, and the lights didn't come on. Remember, we're pitch dark.
Well, the engine was cutting out, in and out. So
And
we're
then and then we
stumbling.
go in front of that boat, and we keep going up, and all of a sudden the engine cuts out completely. And the boat is gaining, and the current is pushing us against the boat. And I thought, we're done. Because even if you jump off, the current is taking you right into the boat, and you're going to be
Well, not only that,
ground beef.
our wetsuits were off. It was cold. It's
Yeah.
freezing. It's freezing. It's pitch black at night. So I remember going through like all the options, like what's the highest chance of survival? What happened? I'm trying to picture like the physics of do if we stay in the boat and he runs us over, are these waves going to capsize us? We'll get sucked under anyway, or are we
Yeah.
going to bounce off? And then I was like, that doesn't sound too good. Then I was like, well, what if I jump in the water? Well, then you got Crocs, sharks, cold water, no wetsuit, and you might get sucked in by the prop. So I'm like, that doesn't seem like a great option either. And then, yeah,
The
miraculously,
best option was prayer. Remember, I said, no, stop praying, stop praying.
yeah. Well, I was at the front of the boat holding the light up, like that would make a difference.
Yeah, there was no light. We had no light.
Oh, we had a little stick.
Oh, the little flashlight.
Yeah, I mean, I had my phone or something. I don't know. And then the Coast Guard showed
Anyways,
up.
those are all great, great memories. Oh boy, but we got to create more. Definitely, we got to create more. What about passing on some history? Because some families had those tradition, they pass on, and the only thing that I can think of, my family really didn't have much in terms of traditional things that they did over and over, but I started one doing lasagna the night before Christmas. All the males, it's you and me. That's it. The male in the family
That
do.
tradition stopped pretty quick because I got no males.
Hey, it's still you and I are still doing it. So you gotta go for a fifth, since you're expecting two,
Uh,
two other girls.
I just need to get some good son-in-laws.
Oh man. Ay, ay, ay. And the other one was also taking measurements. That's another tradition that we have that is kind of interesting. People are saying, taking measurement. What in the world is that? Well,
Yeah.
part of the goals, was also on the physical aspect of it. Measuring, okay, increments, biceps, forearms, quads, calves, recovery rates. So there is some aerobics they need to do and measure some coefficients, the whole thing, to get a coefficient. And it's funny because I started doing that with you, I think was back in 2003, maybe we had the first recordings of that. So it's been quite a while, 22 years ago or so. And we'll be doing it every year. And then we incorporate Isabella, your sister now, into it. And then last year, now she's engaged. She's going to be married pretty soon in September. And the boyfriend, remember at Christmas, we got the boyfriend involved. Poor guy.
Yeah.
He was threatened. It's like, oops. Oh man, what am I getting into here? What is this
We have
family?
we have one measurement from Alvin in there too. I think 2013, 2014. No,
Oh,
but rhythms and tradition are important. We're trying to do that with our girls now is the Shabbats on Friday.
yeah,
Trying to slow down, slow the pace, light candles, turn all the screens off,
mm, that's good.
and just go enter into a full rest period. We've been in and out of rhythm with that. We've been good at it for a little bit, then obviously we've had some complications recently. We haven't been around, so it's made it a little harder. But I noticed that when we have those rhythmic
Yeah.
points in the week, it's something they look forward to. They had fun with it. We make pasta from scratch. We're even milling our own flour now. And that's fun. And I think it is important to pass on tradition. I mean, we're an Italian family. I wish we had more of that to pass down, but I think, it's up to us to just kind of create new ones that we can share.
Have you seen Nonnas yet on Netflix? You got to see that show. Maybe one tradition is to make the three Scotti that I came up with because you guys love him. I just feel
Man,
bad.
they destroyed those. They were gone by last night.
What? No way.
They're all gone.
You haven't had any?
My wife ate them all.
She has good
All
reason, right?
10 or however many. That was the best batch you've made so far.
Oh boy, we got to do that again. All
Yeah.
right, son. Hey, I don't want to keep you too long, and thank you for coming on. Thank you for being a blessing in my life. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for raising me right in a biblical way with
you
lots
know,
of sticks.
we do our best, right? We do our best with his guidance. So
Yeah.
he takes the credit. All right, love you.
All right. Love
Okay,
you.
ciao,
Ciao.
ciao.